Welcome to Break Buys. I'm your host, Brad Kramer. It's the 85th episode, and I am here after a few more car launches. But of course, we are also 1 week closer to lights out and away we go in Bahrain. And I cannot wait for the season to start. It's going to be a good one in 2024, as I've been saying. On this episode, though, we're going to review the launches of Alpine, Wish.com, Red Bull, as I like to call them, and then Aston Martin that actually launched today. I'm recording this on a Monday, so fresh reaction there. After that, we're going to get into some news circulating the F1 world and then go into the final segment. It's 2025 predictions. We got a hell of a silly season in store for us, so I think it's going to be a fun episode there as well. But before we get to that, first, a quick reminder to check out the link tree in the description. It has links to all the platforms you can find this podcast and the ways you can contact me. Now, let's get into it with the liveries. Oh, Alpine, the team that I probably like to make fun of the most. I know the team that we're talking about afterwards, the Wish.com Red Bull, might be the new butt of the joke. But Alpine is just such an easy target. Their launch was a bit of a snooze. They come across so corporate. I've heard some people saying this was better than last year's. I didn't watch last year's, so to say this was better is still pretty shocking. Because it was boring. And when they finally got to the actual Formula One part of it, and they revealed their first livery, my initial reaction was, wow, okay, they're really sticking with a lot of black on the car, perhaps even more black than last year. Well, not perhaps, way more black than last year. But my second reaction, though, and this might be sort of controversial, is that I kind of liked it. Like, I think it looks cool. Let me explain myself, though. I think a lot of the negative reaction around this livery is just the amount of exposed carbon fiber, and it's sort of the way they launched it, and then also we just got a couple cars in a row with a lot of black on it, or carbon fiber, I should say, because it appears that some people don't even mind black as long as it's black paint, just not carbon fiber, which, to be honest, I don't see the big difference. But it's the amount of black after we just had a couple black cars that I think has really ticked people off. Not to mention, it's Alpine. They're an easy team to kind of harp on. They don't have like the best identity. I still think blue and pink is pretty ugly, but I think this is way better than last year's livery. I really do. I hated last year's. It was my least favorite on the grid. And don't get me wrong, I hear you. I hear the complaints about all the black cars. I would like a colorful grid that is easy to distinguish from one another more than anyone. Don't get me wrong, but this is a step forward from last year's. I'm sorry, just looking at it, I think it looks cool. However, the other part, though, that this was a complete shocking move by Alpine, was then they decide, oh, you know what? We have our special pink livery, which I loved last year. Taking out the blue, I thought the pure pink livery looked great. I just think blue and pink are two awful colors together. I know they have to kind of stick with that because that's their color scheme. Um, I just think it looks pretty trash. I'm not gonna lie. So the pure pink livery I really liked. I was looking forward to this, and they got absolutely trolled because it looked the exact same. I still don't really know what the difference is between the pink and the blue livery. So still, they're both black essentially, and there's tiny little bit of accents that are different. Like, it was so dumb. They even used the same instrumental and like kind of drum roll to reveal the car, and it looked the same, and it was just so poorly done, and it was sort of meme worthy. So I think Alpine sort of shot themselves in the foot and made it even worse. But I was shocked to see how many people really hated the livery specifically. If you want to get angry about the carbon fiber, sure, go ahead. I hear you. But just taking the livery at face value, I think if this was the one that was dropped first, I don't think people would be nearly as upset as they are. I think it looks fine. They look good. If they were also on a grid full of colorful cars, I think their livery would smash. Like, I think it's like thought out at least a little bit, the design. Um, but at the same time, saying it's thought out is a bit is a bit disingenuous because it does come across a bit lazy when there's that much exposed carbon fiber on the car at the same time. So I will concede there. Um, I guess that's pretty much all there is to cover on Alpine. They do have a whole brand new car. I guess I could get into that a little bit. Um, I'm not really confident in this team this season. I'm predicting another step back for them, to be honest. Probably not a step back far enough into that bottom four part of the grid performance wise, but I don't think they're making a step forward. But it was interesting to hear that technical director Matt Harmon says that it is a completely brand new car. Um, Probably half the grid is going to have brand new cars this year, just with how dominant Red Bull was last season. All the teams are going to be looking at making a switch toward their philosophy. So Alpine's just the first of many, or they're not even the first of many because Haas is going to do the same. And Sauber just had a big, or Stake, whatever you want to call them, just had a big overhaul as well. So maybe Alpine's found something. Only time will tell there. Now, let's get in to Wish.com Red Bull. No black on this one. This livery made a lot of people happy. And I might have to say this. I might have to put the Wish.com Red Bull name to bed. I know I've used it a few times this episode because I already addressed it last episode that I will thereby be calling this team Wish.com Red Bull. But I think I might just call them Toro Rosso because that is what they are. Um, they've sort of redeemed themselves in a way. Toro Rosso is a way better name than Wish.com Red Bull for sure. It's still a bit of a joke because this team tried to get away from that identity by going to AlphaTauri and becoming more of an independent team. They've been saying this for years that they want to make that second Red Bull team more independent and more standing on its own. And then, rest in peace to Dietrich Mateschitz. He passes, and all of a sudden, this team is right back to being Toro Rosso as it basically started out. And I feel like a lot of work has gone into it to try to make it independent. I'm not sure it's really worked. I don't know anyone who's a fan of this team unless they're also a fan of Red Bull. So it's a bit tricky. I think the fact that Daniel Ricciardo's in the team could have been a way to make it independent because I think that he just brings a lot of followers to that team. But then they go backwards with this Red Bull knockoff look, and it's a nice livery. I do like the livery. They've gone back to their roots in a sense, and it is nicer than the AlphaTauri look for sure. I'm more criticizing the name change and the decision to kind of just go back to the Red Bull Junior team because it's just gone against everything that they've worked towards for the past few years. Um, I don't need to get into it too much. I've kind of already said my piece, even last episode, about how I feel about Toro Rosso, I guess, if I'm going to call them that from now on. I suggest listening to what the race has to say about this team because these are some pretty professional journalists and they keep it pretty together when they're talking about teams, even the most controversial topics. Um, I love their podcast. I've mentioned them a few times on this show as well. Great guys. They absolutely go in on Visa Cash App Red Bull or RB or whatever because what they've done makes absolutely zero sense. And honestly, I suggest just going to them because they talk about it perfectly and they explain why it's the most controversial car on the grid this year. And really, I couldn't agree more. And they say it better than I do. So yeah. Anyway, you know how I feel. Visa Cash App RB stinks. I'm going to be calling them the a different name all year because just out of spite. So Toro Rosso it is. Great livery. But yeah, disappointing launch. It was a bit weird where they didn't film it at all and then they just dropped the livery and everyone was like, oh, okay. At least though the livery has gone over well. People really like it. I do think it looks pretty sweet. So that's great for them, I guess. This is one of the more interesting teams on the grid though this year. I will say I have a few things I wanted to say about them performance wise, or what to expect from them on the track before I get into predictions next week. I think most people are expecting a way better car this year because of their relationship with Red Bull. That's going to be increasing, and part of the team moving to Milton Keynes and whatnot. Um, they ended the year really, really good, probably better than Williams. Should have been seventh. They didn't get it. It's going to be a full year for Daniel Ricciardo, another year in Formula One for Yuki Tsunoda, who's really coming into his own. He was probably one of the stars of the midfield last year. They have a lot of forward momentum, but I'm not sure that's going to take them really to the next echelon of teams, which really the next echelon is just Alpine by themselves. If Alpine takes a step back, I think those two teams could maybe be battling it out. But I wouldn't expect this huge step up the grid because there is a pretty huge step to the Aston Martins, McLarens, Ferrari, Mercedes, that entire group. That's a pretty big step, and they're not going to be in that territory, I think, unless one of them just completely drops the ball. So yeah, their relationship with Red Bull, I think, will reflect in my predictions, but you'll have to wait and see till next week for that. Now, the last launch team is Aston Martin. They're sticking with the green. They're really sticking with the same livery as last year, pretty much. They just switched around some sponsors, made some very minor changes. I think on the back of the rear wing, they had all sorts of colorful. They had kind of like a rainbow on there with the Aramco. Now it's just Valvoline, but like that's the differences that I notice. It's really pretty much the same, but their livery went over really well last year. It was probably one of the favorites on the grid. They're sticking with it. They have a clear identity. I think it works. I don't blame them whatsoever. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. The classic saying, and I think it applies here completely. It is sort of a Red Bull situation, as I've kind of said already, where they just have an identity that works and they're sticking with it. So I think we're probably going to be seeing the same Aston Martin for a while now. Maybe they'll add a new lime green stripe somewhere one of these times, but the British racing green is iconic, and I think they're nailing it. So why switch it? And it is the same with Red Bull. They have a great looking car. I'm obviously decked out in Mercedes here, and I'm not a Red Bull fan. Uh, uh, I've made that known on this podcast, but the reality is they have a beautiful looking car. That navy with the Red Bull logo looks awesome, and I understand why it's something that they never change, and why a lot of people are fans of the team as well, just because they do have a great looking car. Yeah, so you could argue that it's boring to stick with the same thing every year. Like I think Red Bull's launch was like very underwhelming last year because they even teased it as the new RB. What would it be? The RB19? Yeah, they teased it as the RB19, and it wasn't even the RB19. Or so, yeah, it's or was it the RB20? Man, I'm getting it all mixed up now. If this year is going to be the RB20 or the RB21, I don't know. You guys probably know the answer, and I'm struggling for some reason to find out that answer. Um, well, I think it is because it was the RB18B that was the 2021 Challenger, wasn't it? Or was that six? I don't know. I'm losing it here. But anyway, the other thing I kind of wanted to say about Aston Martin, unrelated to their livery, was because Alonso was interviewed by F1's Lawrence Barretto. He actually interviewed Daniel Ricciardo as well. I just don't have that much to share from that interview in terms of my thoughts on things. But Alonso, said some pretty interesting things, I think. He said that the aim is for podiums and wins this year. So Aston Martin still has their sights set pretty high on challenging with the upper or sharper end of the grid. It's also going to be the first year that this team has built their car in the new facility, this new state of the art facility that's been in the work for a long time. So we'll see if that makes a bit of a difference, as it's expecting to with McLaren as well. Both those teams with new facilities should be catching up to the infrastructure, if not surpassing the infrastructure in some of the best teams on the grid, as their stuff was great, but it's actually a little bit older now, right? So that is interesting for Aston Martin, but Alonso also commented on Hamilton's move to Ferrari with a very Fernando sort of comment. He kind of called Lewis out for saying it's a dream to drive for Ferrari when he was saying the opposite in the middle of last year. It was always his dream to end his career with Mercedes, and they were a family, and now all of a sudden it's always been a dream to drive for Ferrari, right? So maybe a little bit of gamesmanship from the 42-year-olds, but he also called his current situation very unique with a seat open at Mercedes. He says there are only 3 world champions on the grid, and he's the only one available for 2025. Fernando get a little cocky there. It's not really cocky, I guess, because it's true. But to point that out when you're 42 years old is kind of he's not shying away from boasting a little bit there, I guess you could say. So classic Alonso. You love to see when he gets to. He says these things so calmly too. He's never like really looking that feisty, but he'll be like, yeah, just there's only 3 world champions on the grid, and I'm one of them available. I can't do his accent, so that's why I'm talking like that. But it's always so relaxed the way he says these comments. I love it. Fernando is a treat to have on the grid. Before I get to the 2025 predictions, some of the news circulating the F1 world, as I teased at the beginning of the episode, is of course this ongoing investigation into actions by Christian Horner, I guess you could say. It's rumored that an unknown female member of the team has reported or has allegations against Christian Horner of some sort of inappropriate misconduct. The details are very scarce right now, so I'm not going to comment on it too much. But the most in-depth reporting, I guess you could say, on this topic I've seen is from Sky Sports' Craig Slater, who I also mentioned last episode. I think he does a great job. Sky Sports, of course, is one of the main news networks that covers Formula One, so very credible source. He doesn't really have much to share either at the moment. He's basically just saying that he's not expecting a result to be coming out of this super fast. Red Bull's taking it very seriously, and this could even get into to preseason testing. I think it's expected to overlap with the launch of Red Bull this week. But yeah, it could go into preseason testing. I imagine if the investigation is ongoing, Horner is going to be away from the team. Maybe not. Who knows? But yeah, a lot of rumors around this too. I don't like all the speculation about how this could be related to a falling out between Horner and Marco or Horner and Jos Verstappen. If it actually has something to do with the Verstappens, that is such a shame. But in the end, as much as I have expressed my disdain for Red Bull on this podcast, I do not wish the downfall of Christian Horner. He's a legend of the sport. However, I'm not going to be defending him if some of these allegations are true, whatever they may be, because of course, if he did engage in inappropriate conduct, then he does deserve to be moved from his post. So that's all I'll say on that matter. Just I'm letting you guys know because expect, or he might not be there for the first race of the season. It's possible, and that would be pretty crazy. So yeah, we'll wait and see. More news coming out on that front. Now, let's segue into probably the more fun part of the episode. Let's predict who is going to be driving for which team in 2025. Okay, so I got it all laid out right now. A few teams are going to be boring picks, and I would say the most boring of all it's got to be Ferrari because it's the most locked in, guaranteed. It's going to be Hamilton and Leclerc next year. Leclerc just signed a brand new extension, and obviously the freshest news in the driver market is that Hamilton will be driving for Ferrari next year as well. So they're super locked in. We basically know that for sure. The other one that I think is pretty much a lock, but it's not guaranteed. There could be some sort of shenanigans, but I think it's also pretty safe to say McLaren, it's going to be Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. I don't see any buyouts coming from any team. It's going to have to cost, any team that wants to buy out Lando Norris an absolute fortune. There could be a mystery clause in his contract, but basically all the communication that's came from Lando Norris's side has been I'm sticking with McLaren. I actually think if anything, it would have to be a bad year from McLaren, and then Oscar Piastri looks to go elsewhere. I still think that's a long shot though, and I think McLaren's going to be pretty good this year. So I think Oscar also stays put. And I don't really have anything else to add on that one. But here is where it gets interesting. A team that I actually have staying the same, but I think that's actually probably more controversial than saying it'll switch because I think pretty much everyone is expecting a switch at this team. I've gone for Red Bull. I think it's going to be Verstappen and Paris again next year. Call me crazy. Of course, Verstappen is a no-brainer. And I don't think many people had Perez in Red Bull's future at all. But with the news that Red Bull wants Alex Albon in the seat in 2026, and Albon is apparently signed with Williams through 25 now, I think they might keep Checo as the stopgap. And I don't think they're going to go for Daniel Ricciardo. I don't think Ricardo is going to be good, just good enough. Like he might be. I don't think he's gonna be terrible. Like I think he's probably gonna match Sonoda, and then if he matches Sonoda, that's just not going to be good enough. So I think they keep Checo. Just Checo does just good enough to stay there for one more year, and then they put all their chips in the table on Alex Albon next year, or who knows, maybe they know something we don't, and maybe Lando Norris is available then because they didn't talk about the length of his contract. So who knows? I just think that they might actually stick with Perez for one more year, and then in 2026, when they really can't afford to have a driver potentially letting them down, they'll go for someone new. That's what I think. I think that might actually be a bold prediction to say they're staying the same when pretty much all messaging has been that Paris is likely on the way out, and they've done this whole thing with Ricardo to try and set him up for a seat at Red Bull. I think they have news trying to get Alex Albon. They've been rumored to want Lando Norris. Carlos Sainz is available. You never know. They could go after him. He is a perfect second driver. I think they'd be confident that Max would be able to handle him. So this is definitely no guaranteed, but yeah, I think Paris is going to stay. The next one then, since I'm kind of giving away that I don't think Alex Albon will be going to Red Bull in 2025, let's talk about Williams. I think Albon stays. I think what they're saying is true. I think Williams is going to have a bit of a step forward again this year, and Alex is going to be fine with staying and building with that team. I think things are sort of turning around there under Vowles. I think a lot of the team members are really starting to come together and maybe feel like they have a different place on the grid than where they've been for a long time. So by no means do I think Williams are a title challenger and even the near to medium future, if you want to call it. They're very, very far away from that still, but they're becoming a pretty solid midfield team again, and I think the team is just excited about that prospect. So I have Albon staying, but I have Logan Sargent leaving the team and getting replaced by Esteban Ocon. That would be a pretty interesting lineup, right? Alex Albon, Esteban Ocon, two veterans in Williams, two guys that can definitely score points for them. And I think the thing with Ocon is this relationship with Gasly is still a little bit fake, in my opinion. And I think Alpine is going to stick with Gasly over him just based off of how last year went and the fact that he's just the more popular of the two French drivers. I also think the Williams move is just because I don't think Esteban's going to have a ton of options and he's going to want to stay in Formula One. And on the flip side, like Williams, I think would love to get a driver of his caliber. It's still sort of in that Mercedes family. I think it actually works out great, and it would be fantastic for Williams to have those two guys and not have a Logan Sargent who, even if he is a little bit better this year, and I think he's going to improve slightly, I don't think it's going to be good enough. And Albon is still going to be relied upon to get most of the points for that team. If they have a guy like Ocon in there, I think they could be solid midfield fighters for a while, or at least always be at the top end of that bottom fight. So a second good driver would be huge there, and that's kind of where I've gone. And of course, where Ocon would like to go is Mercedes. He said himself that he is still affiliated with the team, but of course, I do not have him driving there. I have George Russell, who is a lock, and I have Kimi Antonelli. I am putting him there. I don't think it's going to be Fernando Alonso. I don't think it's going to be Carlos Sainz. It's obviously not going to be Alex Albon. I really think that Antonelli is going to have a great season in Formula 2, whether he wins or not. They're still going to promote him just based off of his unbelievable junior resume and all the hype that surrounds him. it's kind of a perfect storm where I don't think Mercedes is also going to be good enough to fight for the championship in 2025, but they'll still have a good car. It's a perfect 1 year of experience for Antonelli to just get in there, get his feet wet in Formula One, and then get ready for a huge pivotal season in 2026. And I think the performance of George Russell might also make Mercedes want to get Antonelli in the car. I think Russell's great. I think this year is again going to prove that he's maybe not quite at the caliber he needs to be to really challenge Max Verstappen. I would say Russell's a solid 8 out of 10 when, they really need that 10 out of 10 to be able to challenge uh, probably the sport's best talent of all time, Max Verstappen. Maybe Antonelli is that guy. They have to find out sooner rather than later. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. It would be crazy to see a 17, 18-year-old in that Mercedes seat right away. It's something we haven't seen since Max Verstappen. So it would be awesome to see those parallels. I think it very well might happen. If not, maybe Alonso, maybe Sainz. I think it's got to be between one of those two. So from there, though, if Ocon is gone from Alpine, who's driving there, right? So I still have Gasly staying with that team, but I've gone for Valtteri Bottas, and I don't really love this pick. I feel like most of you will probably agree and think, what am I talking about? But I kind of I put everyone else in the positions I think they're going to be in, and then I had Alpine still left over. So I guess you could argue, why not just keep Ocon then? Um, and why try to go for someone like Valtteri Bottas? Why not try a younger driver like Jack Doohan or Victor Martins or something that they have within their team? Zhou Guan Yu even brings some like monetary value or sponsor value to the team. What does Valtteri bring? I kind of get it, but I think Valtteri is definitely going to get let go from stake, as I do Zhou, and I'll get to them next after Alpine. I just I don't think they're going to have a lot of options, and they're going to just want the safest pair of hands. They're going to get rid of Ocon because I just think the dynamic between Gasly and Ocon's not going to work, and they want to shift all their kind of French might around Pierre. I think there's also a chance that Ocon is going to want out of Alpine because he's going to see the team start to shift around Pierre. So this is definitely a bold take, and as I said, probably the least confident I am about any of the picks that I make. Um, but something I think's gotta happen here for another driver to be the obvious choice, because I don't think Zhou's going to show enough. I don't think Doohan has showed enough, and I think they might just go for a veteran presence for a stopgap and see if they can get a young driver in eventually. I would love to see Martins in the car, but I don't think it will happen. Then let's go with Stake next, as I said. This is a brand new lineup because, as I said, I don't think Zhou or Valtteri is going to be here. I got Ricardo and Sainz. Yeah, Ricardo is definitely the bold one. I think Sainz is not that shocking. The rumors have been swirling around him going to this team, and the ties are obvious with his dad um, having a relationship with Audi. But I've gone a little wild with the Ricardo move. As I said, I don't think their young driver, Teo Pourchaire, is going to get a shot with the team. They're going to want someone a little bit better than Valtteri or Zhou. I don't think they're going to have a ton of options. They're not going to need the money from Zhou either, so they're going to go with someone a bit more commercial to try to get fans around the team. And I think a lineup of Ricardo and Sainz would be sort of box office. It'd be kind of sick to see those two drive for stake and then for Audi. I really hope that does happen. But of course, this is a result of RB or whatever choosing to go with Yuki Tsunoda over Ricardo, because Lawson is promised a seat for next year. Of course, you'll see when I talk about them next that I do have Lawson in that seat alongside Yuki Tsunoda. Um, so I've basically chosen that I don't think Ricardo is going to outperform Yuki, and probably boldly, I'm predicting that he stays on the grid though, and he's still good enough. There's so much commercial value with Ricardo, so yeah, I have him going to stake. Then, of course, yes, Sonoda and Lawson I have at Toro Rosso. Uh, as I said, Lawson promised a seat. He gets it alongside Yuki. Kind of a boring pick, but I think that's going to be the case. Haas, kind of the last exciting one, if you even want to call it exciting. I have Hulkenberg staying. There was a bit of a rumor going on that he was, or it wasn't even a rumor, it was an interview that Hulkenberg joked that he already had a contract through the end of 2025. The reporter that interviewed him reported it as fact, and then Hulkenberg called him out and was like, "Hey, I was joking that I don't have that." Anyway, I do think Hulkenberg stays with the team. I think the team ditches K-Mag. I think they're going to have to decide between one of them. K-Mag was Gunther Steiner's friend. I know he's a friend of a lot of people with that team. He's been around a long time, of course, but Hulkenberg's performances have just been better. So I think they stick with him and they bring in the obvious young driver, Ollie Behrman, the Ferrari junior, who could very well win Formula 2, go head to head with Kimi Antonelli this year. That would be crazy. There's plenty of other great drivers on F2. It was actually or in F2 rather. It was actually one of the things I wanted to talk about in my What to Expect episode, and I forgot. So if any of you guys have never checked out F2, this is the year to do it. It's going to be spectacular. There's so many great young drivers, and you're going to see a phenom in Kimi Antonelli drive Formula 2 cars for the first time, Ollie Behrman in his second year in Formula 2, and so many other great drivers as well. I could list them off, and I don't usually follow F2 that much. So yeah, check out F2 this year. It's going to be a banger. And then the last team is Aston Martin, and I have Stroll and Alonso staying. So that means, if I think about it, Zhou Guan Yu, Logan Sargent, Kevin Magnussen. Those three drivers will be without a seat for next season. The other 17 will still be in Formula One, but with a fair few at new teams. Unless I'm forgetting someone, I think that's correct, because the new drivers on this grid will be Behrman, Lawson, and Antonelli. Yeah, yeah. So there you go. Those three in, and then as I said, Joe Sargent, Magnuson are out. So that's going to do it for today's episode. But before we go, I am going to do the question of the week. It's going to be a new thing on every single episode. So the question for last week was, where would you like to see Carlos Sainz drive next year? And the featured answer that I've chosen from my Spotify listeners is from Siggy Korb, who says a number of teams would benefit from having Carlos, but maybe Williams is the place to go. That's interesting. I feel like it would be cool to see Sainz go there. I feel like it would have to be in place of Albon. Sainz and Albon is way too good of a lineup for Williams. That would be insane. I don't think Williams could pull that off. I think the issue would be somehow Sainz being on the outside looking in and not having anywhere to go. But I think it would be really cool to see him there. Unless Williams has like a mega year and they somehow look like an interesting place to go, I don't really know if I could see Sainz going there. So I think he has to be sort of left out of the equation for him to end up at a place like Williams. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just my Williams fandom speaking, but I do really like that shout. And yeah, if you want to be featured on Break Bias with your answer, add a little bit of flair. I had a few people, and this is my own fault, just comment just the team name. You're more likely to get on the episode if you make your answer kind of exciting. I'll just leave it at that. But anyway, as for this week's Spotify question, it's, how much do you care about liveries? I am really curious about this one because personally, it's not something that really gets me going or gets me excited. I always look at the car launches and I try to listen to some of what the team members are saying about their cars and stuff, because honestly, that interests me more than what the cars look like. But I always go and check out just to see what's the grid going to look like this year. It does matter a little bit, but after seeing what they look like, it's kind of a non-story for me. And people that get all worked up about bad liveries is just, it's not something that matters to me that much. But I'm curious to hear maybe why it matters to you, why you love seeing a colorful grid, or how it enhances the viewing experience for you, if you do care, or if you're in my boat and it's not really something you care about either. So yeah, that'll be the question for this week's episode. Make sure to answer to get featured. So yeah, and that's only for Spotify listeners. I know I said that already, but just reiterating that. So I apologize if you're on Samsung or Apple or any of the other platforms you can find this podcast. You won't be able to answer the question that way. But if you're on YouTube, I guess the question's not going to be listed like on Spotify, but feel free to send your answer in the comments, and I'll see them there as well. So that will do it for episode 85 of Brake Bias. I'm your host, Brad Kramer, and I'll be back next Monday for the last of the car launches. In fact, a lot of you will probably have already seen the Ferrari. As I said, I record this on Monday. Ferrari launches on Tuesday, but it's also going to be pre-season prediction time. So, goodbye.